The morning air in Hood River was cool and damp, the kind that carried the scent of wet soil and pine needles after a light summer rain. Mist drifted lazily above the fields, wrapping the wooden fences in soft, white ribbons. A rooster crowed in the distance, and somewhere, water trickled faintly from the old hand pump behind the Dawson house. Hannah Dawson tightened her grip on the metal handle and pulled again. The pump creaked before a stream of cold water spilled into the bucket, splashing against her wrist. She winced from the chill, then smiled faintly. It was the same sound she'd heard every morning since childhood, as constant as her mother's voice calling from the kitchen. "Don't fill it too much, Hannah. You'll hurt your back again," came Agnes Dawson's tone, firm, commanding, but not unkind. "I'm fine, Mom," Hannah called back, her voice carried by the still morning air. She carried the heavy bucket toward the porch, careful not to spill. The boards under her feet groaned softly. Inside, the house smelled of soap and boiled coffee. Agnes stood by the stove in her pale blue robe, her gray hair pinned neatly in a bun. The woman had a face shaped by years of work, sharp, disciplined, the kind that seemed carved out of stubbornness and love all at once. "Put the water near the sink," Agnes said without looking. "And don't forget to feed the rabbits before you leave." "I already did," Hannah replied. "They're fine. Check again after breakfast. Sometimes they tip over the bowl." That was how every day began, a repetition of chores, instructions, and quiet endurance. Hannah poured the water into a pot, rinsed her hands, and sat at the small table by the window. The curtains were thin, letting in a faint gray light that fell over the photographs on the wall. Agnes in her younger years with her late husband, standing in front of the same porch, both smiling under the Oregon sun. Hannah rarely looked at that photo anymore. It reminded her that once, this house had laughter in it. Breakfast was silent except for the clinking of spoons against porcelain. Agnes spoke occasionally about the hens that weren't laying well, or how the neighbor's boy left the gate open again, but Hannah's mind drifted elsewhere. She imagined the highway stretching beyond the town, the line of trucks heading west, the freedom of distance. "You're quiet today," Agnes said. "Just tired," Hannah replied, forcing a smile. Her mother studied her for a moment, then sighed. "You shouldn't stay up reading those magazines. They fill your head with nonsense about city life. People out there are different, Hannah. They take, and they never give back." Hannah's lips pressed together. She had heard this speech 100 times. "I know, Mom." "Do you?" Agnes stirred her coffee. "You think the city cares if you're kind? If you work hard? No. Out there, they'll use you until there's nothing left." Hannah nodded, though her thoughts had already wandered far beyond the kitchen walls, to the storefronts she'd seen in Portland once as a child, to the hum of traffic that sounded like opportunity. After breakfast, she slipped on her worn cardigan and grabbed her tote bag. "I'll be home by 6, she said. Agnes wiped her hands on a dish towel, looking at her daughter as if memorizing every detail before she stepped out. "Stay away from those delivery boys. They're trouble." "Mom, I mean it." Hannah exhaled softly, half amused, half weary. "I know." The screen door creaked open, and the outside world greeted her with the smell of wet grass and apple blossoms. The road leading to town was quiet, lined with old maple trees that arched overhead like a cathedral. Her boots left prints in the mud as she walked, and the wind carried the faint hum of tractors in distant fields. To anyone passing by, her life looked simple, peaceful even. But inside, Hannah felt something restless, like a bird tapping against glass, desperate for open sky. She loved her mother deeply. Agnes had sacrificed everything for her. Yet every act of love came wrapped in fear. Every word of protection felt like another locked door. And as she reached the small grocery store where she worked, she paused for a moment at the doorway, watching her reflection in the glass. For a second, she imagined what it would feel like to leave, to step beyond this valley and never look back. Then she pushed the door open and forced a smile. Another day had begun in Hood River. The same roads, the same voices, the same quiet longing she didn't dare name. The bell above the grocery store door chimed softly as Hannah stacked a fresh delivery of milk bottles onto the shelf. Morning light filtered through the wide front windows, laying pale rectangles across the floor. The air smelled faintly of flour and old wood. Comforting, familiar. Hannah liked these quiet hours, before the regulars began drifting in for their morning bread and coffee. The truck from the bakery pulled up right on schedule. She looked up just as Jason Reed stepped inside, brushing the rain from his jacket. He was around her age, maybe a little younger, with kind eyes and a polite grin that made even the gray morning seem lighter. "Morning, Miss Dawson," he greeted. "Got your usual. 2 crates of bread, fresh out of the oven." "Perfect timing," she said, smiling back. "You always bring the warm ones. Perks of the job." He laughed, setting the crates down beside her. His laugh was easy, open, the kind that made people feel safe. "You know, I drive past the river every day, and I always think, one of these mornings, I should stop and actually fish instead of just dreaming about it." Hannah chuckled softly. "My mother says people who dream too much forget to work." "Well, then I must be in trouble." He winked. It wasn't flirting, not really, just harmless talk between 2 people who spent too much time alone. Still, something in Hannah's chest warmed, a small flicker of joy she rarely allowed herself to feel. And then, like a sudden gust of cold air, the door swung open again. "Good morning, Mrs. Dawson," one of the customers greeted, but Agnes didn't reply. She was already staring at the counter, her eyes narrowing when she saw her daughter standing too close to the delivery man. "Jason," Hannah began softly, but her mother's voice cut through the air like glass breaking. "Go sell your bread elsewhere, boy, before I report you for bothering my daughter." The entire store fell silent. Even the hum of the refrigerator seemed to pause. Jason froze, color draining from his face. "Ma'am, I wasn't," I said. "Leave," Agnes snapped. "We don't need your deliveries if they come with cheap talk." "Mom." Hannah's voice cracked. "He's just quiet." Agnes turned on her, her tone sharp enough to draw blood. "I told you before, Hannah. You think these boys want to marry you? They want one thing and one thing only." Jason stood there, humiliated, unsure whether to defend himself or just disappear. Hannah's hands trembled as she reached for the crate. "Please just go," she whispered, her throat tight. He hesitated, meeting her eyes, something soft, almost apologetic in his expression, then turned and left. The door slammed behind him. The silence that followed was heavy and merciless. Customers exchanged awkward glances, pretending to study the canned goods. An old man cleared his throat and muttered, "Well, that was unnecessary." Agnes ignored him completely. She walked to the counter, adjusted her gloves, and said in a tone of casual authority, "When you're done gossiping, Hannah, make sure you clean the display. It looks dusty." Then she turned and left as calmly as she had entered. Hannah stood frozen, her cheeks burning with shame. She could feel every pair of eyes on her as she tried to steady her breath. Her heart pounded, so hard it hurt. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel like the store girl everyone knew. She felt like a child, scolded in public, exposed. When the last customer left, she sat behind the counter, hands covering her face. The sunlight had shifted, turning harsh and white. That evening, she walked home slowly, her feet dragging through the gravel road. Agnes was already sitting by the porch, peeling apples as if nothing had happened. "You embarrassed me today," Hannah said quietly, standing by the steps. "I saved you," Agnes replied without looking up. That boy was getting ideas. He was being kind, Agnes gave a short laugh. Kind? That's how it starts, Hannah. With smiles and kind words. Then one day you wake up alone, raising a child by yourself while he's long gone. You think I don't know how that story ends. Hannah's voice softened, pleading. I'm not you, Mom. Agnes's hand stopped moving. The knife hovered midair, a slice of apple trembling at the edge. Maybe not, she said, her voice suddenly small. But you could be. Hannah didn't answer. She turned and went inside, closing the door behind her. The sound of it echoed faintly through the quiet house, a sound both of retreat and resistance. Outside, the evening sun sank behind the hills, painting the sky a bruised orange. Inside, mother and daughter sat apart in the same silence. Two women bound by love, fear, and everything neither of them dared to say. The rain had stopped by evening, leaving the air heavy with the scent of wet pine and lilac. The streets of Hood River shimmered under the streetlights, each puddle a tiny mirror reflecting the darkening sky. Hannah walked briskly, her coat pulled tight against the cool breeze. It had been weeks since she'd last seen Sophie Miller, her closest friend from high school, the one person who'd ever truly understood her. Sophie was back in town for a few days, staying with her parents on the edge of the valley. Hannah's heart lifted a little just thinking about it. Sophie had always been different, bold, curious, unwilling to stay trapped by small-town expectations. When they were teenagers, Sophie used to talk about leaving for Seattle, about skyscrapers and late-night coffee shops and freedom. She had done exactly that. When Hannah reached the Miller house, she saw Sophie sitting on the porch steps, legs crossed, scrolling through her phone. Even in the dim light, Sophie looked radiant in her city clothes, a soft cardigan, jeans that actually fit, a quiet confidence that seemed foreign here. Hannah, she called, standing up to hug her. You look exactly the same. And you look expensive, Hannah teased. Sophie laughed. Hardly. Rent's expensive. Everything else. A lie. They went inside, where the living room still smelled of baked bread and old photographs. Sophie's mother had gone to bed early, leaving them alone with a pot of tea. They talked for hours about the people they once knew, the teachers they hated, the lives they'd built since then. So Hannah asked, her curiosity soft but genuine, what's Seattle like? Sophie leaned back, eyes gleaming. It's busy, loud, sometimes lonely, but it's alive, Hannah. You feel it the moment you walk downtown, the noise, the lights, the smell of rain on asphalt. There's this energy, like everyone's chasing something. I work at a nail salon now. Started as a receptionist, but I'm learning the trade. I meet people every day, people from all over. You'd love it. I don't know, Hannah said, half laughing, half wistful. I've never even been outside Oregon. Then it's time, Sophie replied simply. You could stay with me for a bit. Get a job, maybe learn something new. Just a few months. Try living differently. Hannah hesitated, tracing her finger around the rim of her teacup. My mom would never let me go. Let you? Sophie raised an eyebrow. You're almost 30. Hun. I know, she said softly, but she's all I have. Sophie's smile faded into something gentler. Maybe she's afraid of losing you. Or maybe she just doesn't remember what it's like to be your age. But you can't live her life for her. You have to live yours. The words sank deep into Hannah's heart. Outside, a train passed in the distance, its low rumble echoing through the hills. For the first time in a long while, she imagined herself on it, heading toward a skyline she'd only seen in magazines, carrying nothing but hope and a small suitcase. The thought terrified her, and yet it thrilled her, too. By the time Hannah left, the sky had cleared completely. The moon hung low above the orchards, silver and sharp. She walked home slowly, her mind full of the city Sophie had described, the lights, the sound, the possibility. When she stepped onto the porch, she saw the glow of the living room lamp still on. Her stomach sank. Agnes was sitting by the window, knitting needles frozen midair. "Where were you?" her mother asked quietly. "With Sophie. She's home for a few days." Agnes's lips tightened. That girl's always been a bad influence. Filling your head with nonsense about city life. You think you'd survive there? You'd get chewed up before the week's over. Mom, she's doing fine. She has her own place. A job enough. Agnes pressed a hand to her chest, breathing unevenly. "You don't understand. I can't go through this again. If you leave, my heart won't survive it." "Mom, please don't start. I mean it, Hannah." Her voice cracked just slightly. "You're all I have." The guilt hit hard and fast. Hannah knelt beside her, resting a hand on her shoulder. Agnes looked pale, fragile beneath the lamplight. For a moment, Hannah's anger melted into something softer, pity, or maybe fear. "I'm not leaving," she whispered. "I promise." But later that night, lying awake in her small room, Hannah stared at the ceiling and knew the promise wouldn't last. Sophie's words echoed in her mind. "You have to live yours." Outside, the wind moved through the apple trees, whispering like an invitation. Somewhere far away, a city was waiting. And in the darkness, Hannah began to plan. The days that followed blurred into one long silence. Hannah did her chores, kept her head down at the store, and tried not to think about the conversation with her mother. But every time she looked out across the fields, at the endless stretch of green framed by the mountains, she felt the same ache, a mix of love and suffocation. Sophie had called that morning. "We're leaving Friday night," she said. "Dad's driving me back to Seattle. If you want to come, this is your chance." The words hung in the air like an open door Hannah didn't yet dare to step through. But by evening, the decision had already taken shape in her chest. There would be no permission, no goodbye, just escape. That night, after Agnes had gone to bed, Hannah sat on the edge of her small wooden bed, suitcase open beside her. The sound of the ticking wall clock filled the room. Every tick felt like a heartbeat urging her forward. She folded her clothes quietly, the same few dresses she wore to work, a cardigan, her worn-out jeans. She added the old photograph of her parents she'd secretly kept hidden in a book, a reminder of the love that once lived in this house before fear took its place. When she was done, she pulled a notepad from the drawer and wrote slowly, her hand trembling. "Mom, I love you, but I can't breathe here anymore. Don't look for me." She placed the note neatly on the kitchen table, next to the sugar bowl her mother used every morning. The house was still, except for the faint creak of the rafters and the low hum of the refrigerator. Hannah stood there for a moment, staring at the shadows on the wall, wondering if she was doing something unforgivable. But the thought of staying, of waking up in the same room for another year, another decade, felt worse than sin. At 11:45, she slipped on her coat, slung the suitcase over her shoulder, and opened the back door. The night air rushed in, cold and damp. She paused on the porch. The moon hung high above the orchard, pale and full, bathing the old Dawson farmhouse in silver light. The well behind the house glimmered faintly under the moon, the same well she had drawn water from since childhood. She remembered her mother's voice echoing through the years. "Don't fill it too much, Hannah. You'll hurt your back again." Now the voice was just an echo. Her throat tightened. Tears burned behind her eyes, but she blinked them away. "I'm sorry, Mom," she whispered, though no one could hear her. The road to Sophie's house was quiet, the gravel crunching softly beneath her boots. The world smelled of rain and cedar, the distant hum of crickets blending with the whisper of the wind. By the time she reached the miller's driveway, her heart was pounding so fast it drowned out everything else. Sophie and her father were waiting by the truck, headlights dimmed. "You ready?" Sophie asked gently. Hannah nodded, clutching her suitcase. "I didn't tell her," she said, voice cracking. "You couldn't," Sophie replied. Sometimes leaving is the only way to stay alive. Mr. Miller opened the door for her, and Hannah climbed into the back seat. As the truck started down the narrow country road, she looked out through the window. The house was no longer visible, hidden behind the curve of the hill. But in her mind, she could still see it, the porch light flickering, the curtains drawn, the note waiting on the kitchen table. She wondered how long it would take for her mother to find it. She wondered if she'd ever forgive her. The truck turned onto the main highway. The sign ahead read 84 East Portland/Seattle. The wheels hummed against the asphalt, the sound rising steady and low like a heartbeat. Outside, the world unfurled. Miles of darkness, the faint outline of pines, the reflection of the moon on the river. Hannah pressed her forehead against the cold glass and closed her eyes. Behind her was everything she had ever known. Ahead was everything she had ever wanted, though she didn't yet know what it looked like. Somewhere between the two, the girl from Hood River quietly became a woman. The morning mist over Seattle was thick enough to blur the skyline into watercolor. Hannah pressed her forehead against the cool window of the truck as it rolled into the city. The highway curved along the Puget Sound, and between the fog and the faint hum of the engine, everything felt unreal, as if she were still dreaming. Seattle looked nothing like Hood River. There were cranes and bridges and buildings that touched the clouds, traffic lights blinking through the fog like fireflies. People moved with purpose, fast, confident, untethered. Sophie turned in her seat and grinned. "Welcome to chaos," she said. "Don't worry. You'll get used to it." They parked in front of a narrow apartment building in Capitol Hill, the kind with peeling paint but flower pots in every window. Sophie's apartment was small, just one bedroom, a kitchenette, and a sofa that folded out into a bed. Still, to Hannah, it felt like freedom wrapped in a city's heartbeat. She stood by the window that overlooked the street and whispered, "So this is it." "This is it," Sophie replied, tossing her keys onto the counter. "Home, at least for now." For the first few hours, Hannah unpacked quietly. Every sound, a car horn, the rumble of the monorail, the chatter from the cafe downstairs, felt foreign and exciting. But when the excitement faded, homesickness began to creep in. She picked up her phone, hesitating for a long time before dialing her mother's number. The call rang twice before Agnes answered. "Mom, it's me," Hannah said softly. A long pause. Then, a voice cold enough to cut through the static. "You have your new life now. Don't call again." "Mom, please," but the line went dead. For a moment, Hannah stood frozen, the phone still pressed to her ear. Then the tears came, quiet, uncontrollable, the kind that made breathing difficult. Sophie found her a few minutes later, still standing by the window. "She'll come around," Sophie said gently, handing her a cup of tea. "Mothers always do." But Hannah wasn't sure. She felt like someone had closed a door behind her, not with anger, but with finality. The next morning, she decided she couldn't just sit in that apartment waiting for forgiveness. She needed work, something to keep her hands busy and her thoughts from circling. She spent days walking the city, carrying printed resumes that looked too plain next to the confidence of others. Coffee shops, bookstores, small boutiques. Each place had the same polite answer: "We're looking for someone with more experience." By the end of the week, her shoes were soaked from rain, and her hope was thinning. She sat on a bench outside Pike Place Market, watching people rush by with umbrellas and paper cups of coffee. Her phone buzzed, a text from Sophie. "Don't give up. Try the florist near Stewart Street, the one with the green awning." Hannah looked up, just across the intersection. Under the drizzle, she saw it. Brooks Floral Studio. The sign in the window read, "Now hiring, no experience needed." She crossed the street, heart beating faster. The bell above the door chimed softly as she entered. The scent hit her first: lilies, roses, eucalyptus, layered like a symphony. The shop glowed with soft yellow light, vases arranged in perfect order, petals scattered like confetti. For a moment, she just stood there, breathing it in. A young woman at the counter looked up and smiled. "Can I help you?" "Yes," Hannah said, her voice quiet but certain. "I saw the sign. I'd like to apply." As she filled out the small form and glanced around the room, something inside her eased for the first time since she left home. The air felt warm, gentle, full of life and color. For the first time in weeks, Hannah wasn't running from something. She was walking toward it. The next morning, the city was wrapped in soft drizzle again, a kind of gray that seemed endless but gentle, as if Seattle never truly woke up or slept. Hannah arrived early at Brooks' floral studio, her shoes squeaking slightly against the wet pavement. The shop looked even more beautiful in the morning light. Rows of hydrangeas by the window, roses in glass vases, and soft music playing somewhere in the back. A woman at the counter greeted her. "You must be Hannah. Mr. Brooks is expecting you." She followed the woman through a narrow hallway filled with the smell of cut stems and soil. The air was cool and damp, alive with the scent of life and decay all at once. At the end of the hall was an office door, slightly ajar. "Come in," a calm male voice said. Behind a simple wooden desk sat Daniel Brooks, the owner. He was a man in his early 50s, with graying hair at the temples and the quiet confidence of someone who'd built his own life from the ground up. His eyes were kind, tired, but kind, and there was something immediately reassuring about his presence. "Hannah Dawson," he said, extending a hand. "Thank you for coming in so quickly. I've heard good things about your manners, and I could use someone dependable around here." She smiled, shaking his hand. "Thank you, Mr. Brooks. I won't let you down." They went over the usual paperwork, a simple contract, a few tax forms, a temporary schedule. Hannah listened carefully, trying not to stare around the room too much. It was neat, almost austere. A few awards on the wall, some books about floral design, and one framed photo facing the desk. When she leaned forward to sign her name, the reflection of that photo caught her eye. Her breath caught in her throat. Inside the frame was the face she knew better than her own. Younger, softer, but unmistakable. Her mother, Agnes Dawson. Only here, the photograph showed a much younger version of her, smiling brightly, wearing a floral dress Hannah had never seen. The frame was dark, bordered in black, the kind used for remembrance. Hannah froze, pen hovering above the page. The sound of the rain outside faded into nothing. Her vision tunneled until all she could see was that image, her mother's face, preserved in someone else's memory. "Is everything all right?" Daniel asked, looking up from his papers. She swallowed hard. "That picture," her voice trembled. "Why do you have this picture?" Daniel followed her gaze and blinked. His expression shifted, confusion first, then pain. He leaned back slowly, as if bracing himself against a memory. "That's my fiancée," he said quietly. "Her name was Lena. She died in a bus accident 30 years ago." Hannah's heart stopped. She shook her head, her voice barely a whisper. "No, that's not possible." Daniel frowned. "I beg your pardon." "She's not dead," Hannah said louder this time. "She's alive. Her name is Agnes Dawson. She's my mother." For a long, unbearable moment, the room went still. Daniel's face drained of color. Then he laughed, a soft, disbelieving sound that didn't reach his eyes. "Miss Dawson, that's absurd. My Lena died. I attended her funeral. Her mother told me herself." Hannah stood, trembling. "Then her mother lied. She told you she was dead, but she wasn't. My mother's alive. She's in Oregon." "Enough!" he said sharply, the calm in his voice replaced by something colder. "I don't know what game you're playing, but I won't tolerate this. Please leave." "Mr. Brooks, please look at me. Look at that photo. You can see it, can't you? It's her. Out." His voice cracked this time, not with anger, but with fear. "Get out of my office." Hannah's hands shook as she gathered her bag. The air between them felt electric, heavy with disbelief and something that bordered on grief. As she stepped out of the office, her knees almost gave way. The scent of flowers hit her, too sweet, too alive, too cruel. She stumbled into the rain, gasping for breath, unsure she was shaking from cold or from what she'd just discovered. Behind her, in that quiet office, Daniel Brooks sat motionless. His eyes stayed fixed on the photo, the woman in the black frame, smiling as if frozen in time, while the rain outside whispered that the dead don't always stay buried. Hannah barely slept that night. The image of the photograph haunted her every time she closed her eyes, her mother's younger face smiling from behind that dark frame. It didn't make sense. None of it did. If Daniel Brooks truly believed her mother was dead, then someone had lied, and the only person who could have done that was her grandmother, the woman Agnes rarely spoke of. When morning came, the city was soaked again. Hannah stood outside the shop for nearly 15 minutes before finding the courage to go in. The bell over the door chimed softly, but there was no music this time, no warmth in the air. The assistant at the counter looked startled when she saw her. "Mr. Brooks isn't taking visitors," she said hesitantly. "Please," Hannah replied. "He needs to hear me out. Just 5 minutes." Something in her eyes must have convinced the woman, because she simply nodded toward the back. Daniel was in his office, staring out the window. The blinds were half drawn, light filtering through in thin gray stripes. He didn't turn around when she entered. "I told you not to come back," he said quietly. "I know," she said, stepping closer. "But please just listen. I'm not lying to you." He finally looked at her, and for the first time his eyes weren't angry. They were tired, uncertain. "You said that woman in the photo is your mother." "She is." Hannah's voice was steady this time. "Her name's Agnes Dawson. She lives in Hood River, Oregon. She raised me alone." Daniel shook his head slowly, as though the movement itself could keep his world from tilting. "That can't be. I saw the photos. Her mother came to me. She said there'd been an accident. A bus on the mountain road. There were funerals. I grieved her for years." "She lied to you," Hannah said softly. "I think she wanted to keep you apart." He turned back toward the window, resting a hand on the sill. His shoulders were trembling, slightly. "30 years ago," he began, his voice distant, "I met a girl named Lena. She was the brightest thing I'd ever seen. She laughed at everything, even when life gave her nothing to laugh about. We wanted to marry, but her mother said I wasn't good enough. I was working at a delivery yard then, small paycheck, long hours. I told Lena I'd come back for her once I had something to offer." He paused, taking a shaky breath. A few months later, her mother called. She said Lena had been visiting her aunt and the bus went off the road. Everyone died. I drove through the night to her hometown, but they told me the burial was already done. Her mother, she wouldn't even let me see the grave. Hannah's throat tightened. "And you believed her?" "I had no reason not to." He gave a bitter laugh. "I spent years building this place, thinking maybe if I surrounded myself with beauty, it would fill the hole she left, but it never did." For a moment, the only sound was the soft tapping of rain against the glass. Then Hannah spoke, her words trembling. She had a daughter. Daniel turned sharply. "What?" "She had a baby. Me. She never told me who my father was. I thought he'd abandoned her." His eyes widened, searching her face for proof. Something familiar, something undeniable. "No, that can't," his voice broke, and he pressed a hand to his mouth as though trying to hold back a lifetime of pain. "I lost both of you, without even knowing you existed." Hannah stepped closer, tears burning her eyes. "We can find out for sure. Come with me. See her yourself." He stared at her for a long time, as if weighing the risk of reopening a wound that had never truly healed. Then slowly he nodded. If what you're saying is true, I owe her an apology I should have made decades ago. Then let's go, she said softly. Tomorrow morning. Daniel turned back to the window, watching the rain streak down the glass like silver threads. 30 years, he murmured. 30 years I've been living with a ghost. Hannah didn't answer. She stood beside him in silence, both of them staring into the same gray distance, one chasing the past, the other searching for the truth that could finally set them both free. They left Seattle just after sunrise. The city was still half asleep, shrouded in mist, the streets glistening from last night's rain. Daniel drove, hands tight on the steering wheel, while Hannah watched the gray sky give way to a soft orange glow as they climbed into the Cascades. The road wound through evergreens and steep ridges, the radio murmuring quietly between patches of static. Neither spoke much. Some truths didn't need words yet. They hung between them, heavy and fragile. By late morning, the familiar fields of Hood River came into view. Rolling orchards, small barns, and distant mountains wrapped in thin clouds. Hannah's pulse quickened. Every tree, every bend in the road, carried memories she'd been running from. She wasn't sure what terrified her more, seeing her mother again or what she might learn when she did. Daniel slowed the car as they turned down the narrow gravel road leading to the Dawson farmhouse. It looked smaller than Hannah remembered, its paint peeling, the porch sagging slightly. Near the well, a woman stood hanging laundry on the line, her mother. Agnes moved slowly, folding each cloth with care, her gray hair tied back in a neat bun. The car door opened, gravel crunching under their feet. Agnes looked up at the sound. When her eyes met Daniel's, the basket in her hand slipped, spilling linens onto the damp grass. For a long, aching moment, no one spoke. "Daniel," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Is that you?" He nodded, his expression unreadable, somewhere between disbelief and sorrow. "It's me, Agnes." Her lips trembled. You thought I was gone," he said softly. "That's what your mother told me too." Agnes's face went pale, as if every year she'd carried this secret came crashing back at once. She looked from Daniel to Hannah and back again, her breathing unsteady. "You shouldn't have come here." Hannah stepped forward. "Why, Mom? Why shouldn't we?" Agnes's eyes flicked toward her daughter, a flash of fear, then resignation. "Because some things should stay buried." Daniel shook his head. "You let me think you were dead. For 30 years. Tears welled in Agnes's eyes. She pressed a trembling hand to her mouth. "It wasn't me. It was my mother. She hated you, Daniel. She said you'd never give me a good life. When you left for that job in Portland, she made me promise to forget you. When she heard about that bus crash, she told me you'd been told I was on it. She made me swear never to contact you again. She said if I did, she'd tell everyone my child was illegitimate." Hannah's breath caught. "Your child? You mean—" "Yes," Agnes whispered. I was already pregnant when he left. My mother thought shame was worse than heartbreak." She looked down, unable to meet their eyes. "I wanted to tell you the truth when you were old enough, Hannah. But every time I tried, I saw her face again, her threats. I thought I was protecting you from her world and from mine." Hannah's voice cracked. "You lied to me all my life." Agnes flinched as though struck. "I did, and I hate myself for it every day." Daniel took a step closer, his voice rough but gentle. "We all lost too much time, Agnes. There's no fixing that. But hiding from the truth didn't save anyone." She looked up at him then, the man she'd loved, now older, lined by years they never shared. Tears streamed silently down her face. "You should hate me." He shook his head. "No, I've done enough hating for one lifetime." Hannah stood there, frozen between them, the weight of 30 years pressed down on her. Generations of silence, fear, and love twisted into something unrecognizable. Then, slowly, she stepped toward Daniel. Her hands were trembling when she reached for him, but he didn't hesitate. He pulled her into an embrace, his arms strong and shaking all at once. "I missed your whole life," he murmured against her hair. "You didn't even know I existed," she whispered back. "But you're here now." Agnes stood a few feet away, motionless, watching them through tears. Her hands were still clutching a piece of linen, knuckles white. She looked like a woman turned to stone, the past holding her in place. The wind rose, carrying the scent of wet earth and apple blossoms. The laundry fluttered on the line, the white fabric catching the light like ghostly flags of surrender. No one spoke again. The moment didn't need words. It was both an ending and a beginning, the closing of a wound that had waited 3 decades to be seen. Seattle had already slipped into autumn by the time Hannah began to feel at home again. The mornings were crisp, and mist rolled across the streets like soft breath from the sound. Each day, she walked to Brooke's floral studio beside her father, who had insisted she call him Daniel now, not Dad. Not yet, not until it felt right. But some mornings when she forgot herself and said it anyway, he didn't correct her. He only smiled. The shop had become her sanctuary. She learned how to trim stems, match colors, balance scents, how to make beauty from fragile things. Daniel taught her everything with the patience of a man who knew how easily life could break. Sometimes, in the quiet hours before opening, they worked side by side, saying nothing. The silence between them was no longer awkward. It was gentle, full. One evening after closing, Daniel disappeared into the office for a moment and came back holding something small. It was the photograph, the same one that had once hung in the black frame, but now it rested in a new one, made of soft green wood, the color of fresh leaves after rain. He set it on the counter between them. "I think this suits her better," he said quietly. Hannah looked at the picture, her mother's young face smiling from another lifetime. The dark border that had once symbolized death was gone. The new frame felt alive, forgiving. Daniel rested a hand on the counter. "Some losses turn into gifts, if we dare to face them." She smiled faintly. "Do you think she'll ever forgive herself?" He took a deep breath, then exhaled slowly. "Maybe not fully, but she'll try. That's all any of us can do." The phone rang, its sound soft against the hum of the city outside. Hannah picked it up, and when she heard her mother's voice, the ache that once lived in her chest no longer hurt the same way. "Hi, Mom," she said. "Hi, sweetheart," Agnes replied. "I saw the first frost this morning. Remember how you used to try to catch it with your hands?" "I remember," Hannah said, smiling. "I still can't believe you let me do that." "Well," Agnes chuckled faintly, "you never listened anyway." They talked for a while about the weather, the flowers, small things that mattered only because they were shared. No tears, no accusations. Just 2 women learning how to speak again after years of silence. When the call ended, Hannah stood for a moment, phone still in hand, watching her father adjust the lights by the window. The shop glowed in soft gold and green, petals glimmering like tiny lanterns. She felt it then, not triumph, not regret, but peace. The kind that came only after truth had done its quiet work. That night, before leaving, she placed a new photo beside her mother's on a shelf, one of herself and Daniel, taken outside the shop. In it, they were both laughing, the sunlight catching their hair. For a long while, she simply stood there, staring at the 2 frames, the past and the present side by side. Maybe forgiveness wasn't something that came all at once. Maybe it bloomed slowly, like the flowers they tended each morning. Fragile at first, then steady, then inevitable. As Daniel turned off the last light, Hannah whispered the words she'd been carrying since that day in Hood River. The truth didn't change the past, but it changed everything about tomorrow. Outside, Rain began to fall, soft, cleansing, endless. Inside, the flowers kept their quiet vigil, and the green frame gleamed faintly under the light, no longer a reminder of loss, but of love reclaimed,